Hello my friends, HM here. Now in this video, that is the second part of a video I'm doing about 3 new Ukrainian-made missiles. We will discuss primarily this weapon here, which is a cruise missile, and then we'll also discuss this weapon up here, which is a ballistic missile that Ukraine also are developing. In the first part of my video, we discussed this Ballistic drone down here, but it's a much smaller drone. It's 120 kilo, whereas this one is a 1-ton cruise missile, and this one up here is a 4-ton ballistic missile. These weapons will be very important for Ukraine because they are Ukrainian-made weapons. They are faster than any other long-range weapon that Ukraine has built, and therefore it will be much harder for Russia to stop these weapons and shoot them down. And because Ukraine has built them, they can strike whatever they want in Russia. And it's absolutely necessary that Ukraine are allowed to strike inside Russia, also with Western weapons, because they cannot win the war if they're not allowed to strike Russia in that way. In the first part of the video, I'm going to reveal a lot more about this weapon here and how Ukraine can use it to win the war. And I'm also going to make some suggestions about how Ukraine can make this weapon even more powerful by importing stuff from other countries, because they don't have to make everything themselves, and because there are better alternatives that can be imported, and that will also diminish the chance that Russia can bomb the factories that are making parts for this weapon, and therefore Ukraine should be able to make more of them so they can win the war. Now, if you think that sounds interesting, you should keep watching. Before we begin, I have to say thank you to the many new subscribers I got since I dropped my last video, the first part of this video here. I have gotten more than 900 new subscribers, which is quite a lot because, as you can see now, my channel is almost 4,000 subscribers. So growing with almost 1,000 from that level is very large. Also, I'd like to give a special thanks to those who donated $1 or $2 for me for making this video. And you can do that by clicking these dots down here and then click the thanks button. And then you can, because I'm Danish, it says in Danish 20 kroner, that's about $3. That's minimum. And then you can just go up if you want to donate more. And then it's just as simple as clicking here, buy and send. Now that's only if you got this premium subscription to YouTube that costs about $20 a month. And it's a really good deal if you have that, because you get rid of all the commercials. YouTube also give you YouTube Music. That's included in that buy, and that means you can cut your subscription for Spotify or Apple Music. That will save you at least $10 a month. So it's really, to get premium with YouTube, it's really only a $10 thing per month. And then it's much easier to donate money to content makers on YouTube. And there's also one more reason that premium YouTube is a really good deal, and that is that you get access to all the videos on YouTube, also those videos that are otherwise censored. I didn't know that until I became a content creator myself, but as a content creator, you have to go in and self-censor your own movies. If I know I have in my video some explosions or something, or show of destroyed buildings and stuff, then I have to censor it myself and send that to YouTube and say that this video has some violence in it that some viewers might find disturbing. And what YouTube will then do is that they don't show that video to those who have YouTube with commercials, because the advertisers are requiring that that kind of videos is not shown together with their commercials. But if you have YouTube Premium, you still get it and you're not censored. And I think that's a pretty important reason also to get this YouTube Premium. And YouTube are not paying me for saying all this. I just thought it was a proper thing to say that you really get a good deal with YouTube Premium, and also it's easier for you to donate money to content creators that you like on YouTube. So with that out of the way, let's get to it. So the missile we are talking about is this one, and I found it on Wikipedia's page. It's called R360 Neptune, and we have a bigger picture of it here. Here it's shown on a military exhibition in Kyiv, Ukraine in 2021. So Ukraine has been working on this missile, which is a naval cruise missile intended to sink ships. They've been working for that for a while, and it was operational at the beginning of the war with Russia in February 2022. And the first super successful use of this weapon was when they sunk the Russian cruiser Moskva. This is how it looks. This was the flagship of the Russian Black Sea Navy. It had between 500 and 600 men on board, a helicopter deck, lots of missiles that were supposed to be able to protect this ship against missile attack, but Ukraine's Neptune missile made it through. 2 of them made it through. And let me show how this ship looked after it was hit by 2 of these Neptune missiles. It looked like this, and it later sunk. There was a salvage ship that also came out to it, but that was also hit with another third missile, and then it had to go away as fast as it could before that was also sunk. So that was, of course, the first successful use of this weapon. But what happened after that was that Russia, of course, pulled back their ships from the Ukrainian coast so they couldn't be hit again with this naval cruise missile from Ukraine. So then Ukraine really couldn't use it anymore, the missile, because they had no target opportunities. So they started to develop a version of this missile that could be used for striking targets on land instead. A land attack variant was being developed as of April 2023 and was close to completion. And they said it would have a range of 360 kilometers. Up here, by the way, we can see some specifications that this page gives about this weapon. It says it weighs 870 kilo. That's not unnormal for a naval cruise missile. But then it says the warhead is 150 kilo and it has a range of between 200 and 300 kilometers. They also say which engine they have used. And I've used the specifications of that engine and other things I know to figure out that that warhead is definitely not 150 kilo. It's 300 kilo. And the range is not what they say here, it's actually 500 kilometers. Now, this is something Russia can easily find out themselves simply by using publicly available information. So it's not that I'm doing Ukraine a disfavor by saying, okay, this information on Wikipedia is wrong. But I'll come back to how anyone can figure that information out by themselves if they dig a little bit deeper. So they reported they had developed a land-based version of this, and I think the first attack with that land-based missile came here in August 2023. According to Ukrainian media, a modified Neptune missile was used to destroy an S-400 missile system radar deployed in Crimea. That's a land-based target. And also on the 14th of September, Ukraine forces subsequently claimed to have destroyed an S-400 missile system near some city there using drones and Neptune missiles. Then there are some other targets also in Crimea Peninsula on some ships that were stationary in the harbor that was also struck reportedly with this Neptune land-based missile. And then here in April 2024, Ukraine was working to extending the range of the missile to 1,000 kilometers while increasing the production tenfold. So yes, Ukraine know they have a good weapon here and they want to make many more of them. Now 1,000 kilometers, that's not possible if they want to use the same jet engine as they have used for this Neptune missile, but I'll come back to that later. But let me finish up the other targets here that Ukraine have struck. So in May 2024, Ukraine fired several Neptune missiles at an oil depot that they attacked inside Russia. And then Russia has also started to call this Neptune missile the Neptune MD as a call name for that kind of weapon used by Ukraine. So we know Ukraine has developed this weapon. The Russian also acknowledged it that they have a land-based cruise missile. And then here on the 31st of July 2024, a Neptune missile struck an airbase in Kursk, Russia, 100 kilometers from the border from Ukraine, hitting a warehouse for storing weapons and military equipment. Now, I saw videos from that target and it blew up the ammunition dump. And the reason that's an interesting target is that it is an airbase is really something that's protected by a lot of anti-aircraft systems. And there's no way that the slow-flying drones that Ukraine also have could have entered that area of that airbase. They would have been shot down. But this Neptune missile is flying a lot faster, and therefore it is more difficult to shoot down. Also, it's flying low. It's a cruise missile. It means it flies below the radar, and there will only be a very short warning for the airbase about knowing that something is coming in. They have a land-based radar, but it doesn't have a lot of range for low-flying objects that will only be able to see like 40 kilometers from the airbase, and then only gives them very little time, like 2 minutes. And that means this weapon is extremely important for Ukraine because it's the first time they have a weapon that can actually penetrate heavily guarded targets in Russia, like air bases. So it will be very important for Ukraine's ability to win the war that they have a weapon that can hit Russian air bases, and therefore also force Russia to withdraw their air forces, their helicopters, their airplane to much further away from the front lines in Ukraine. and therefore they can't use their air force as they do currently with glider bombs and also helicopter attacks firing missiles at Ukrainian troops. But let's move on and dig a little deeper about what we know about this Ukrainian missile. Now, I keep a record of all the weapons that I bump into in an Excel spreadsheet because it's the best way to organize all the key facts about weapons. And it also enables me to do some calculations within that spreadsheet if I need extra information that requires some thought of calculation. So I'll bring in that spreadsheet now. The weapons we are discussing in this video are all down here in yellow. This one is this Neptune anti-ship missile. That's the first row here. And the next row here is the land-based version of this Neptune missile that Ukraine has made. And then we have the Ballistic biggest. That's also a cruise missile. And that's my suggestion for what Ukraine can do to quickly develop an even bigger and more powerful version of this cruise missile. And we'll talk about that later. And down here I have the ballistic missile I was also talking about that Ukraine has developed. That ballistic missile is something they have had under development for actually 20 years. But the president of Ukraine said a few weeks ago that they had successfully made a test fire of this missile. And by that I think they fired it successfully at Russian target. Because why not? They're in a war. When they do test, they might as well test on Russian live targets. That's the best way to test it. So they have at least fired one. But quite frankly, I also think it's the only missile they have made that was operational. Now, this ballistic missile, if you pay close attention to this table, you can see there's another missile called the Iskander right below. And that's a Russian ballistic missile. And you can also see that the characteristics of these two weapons, the Ukrainian ballistic missile and this Iskander missile, are pretty much identical. It's because we don't know really any specifications of the Ukrainian-made missile, but we do have a little bit of knowledge about it. Let me go back to the web page here. Here, this is a Wikipedia page about this Hirim-2 missile that Ukraine has been working on for 20 years, but hadn't really started serious production of it. The reason I think it's a copy, basically, of the Iskander missile is that it looks exactly the same. Take a look at this missile and take a close look at the form of it. How do you think that look? Now we take that out and then we go over to the Russian missile. It's the same. It's the same. The dimensions are the same. And Russia and Ukraine have had a lot of military products made together when they were in the former Soviet Union. And I just think that a lot of engineers on this Iskander missile was also Ukrainians. And when the two countries separated, well, then Ukraine tried to start their own production and development of this Iskander missile. And they just call it by another name. And actually, that's all I want to say about that ballistic missile. We don't know much about it. I also think that it's very hard for Ukraine to get any production started by this missile because it will require factories in Ukraine, large factories that build it, and Russia will know where these factories are and they can destroy them. So I think it'll be really hard for Ukraine to maintain a production of this missile. I think it's far more interesting to produce cruise missiles for a number of reasons. So let's, for the remainder of this video, talk about that cruise missile. So let's get back to this table here with my missiles, and let's start with this Neptune anti-ship missile. What can we read in this table? Well, we can read here the year it was made first, it was 2021, and unit cost, I don't know what it cost. I have many other unit costs from lots of other weapons. I couldn't find anything about this anti-ship weapon here from Ukraine, probably because it's so new. They haven't had a chance to sell it to other countries, so no price. But then we have the range of the weapon. It's 500 kilometers, and I'll come back to how I estimate that. We also have the speed of the weapon. It's 1,180 kilometers per hour. And again, I'll come back to how we estimate that. Both of these values are not something you can find on the internet. You have to figure it out yourself, but there are ways to do that, and I'll show you shortly. And then the warhead here is 300 kilo. I also calculated the time it takes to fly the range with the speed the weapon has, and that's 25 minutes. That's a very easy calculation, and that's something I do inside the Excel spreadsheet, of course. And what else? I have a little estimate of the numbers built of this Neptune missile. It's definitely under 100, and certainly right now they will not build any more because Russia is not giving them any opportunities to use this missile anymore because they've withdrawn their ships out of range of this weapon. But let me now show you how I calculate the top speed of this missile, because it's the same method I use for all the other weapons, so we don't have to repeat that, how I found out the top speed of the other weapons and also the range. The first thing I do is I find out which engine does this weapon have. Here we have it. This Wikipedia page is actually telling us what the engine that is used. Here is the engine, we can just click it. And then we have the engine of this missile. And there's a lot of important stuff here. There's the specifications for that engine. It shows how heavy it is, 85 kilo. It's also showing the max thrust, how much it pushes. It pushes 404 kilo, and we'll use that shortly. And also has a specific fuel consumption that I use. It's thrust-specific fuel consumption. It shows here that this engine uses 0.78 pounds of fuel per pound of thrust from the engine every hour. And of course, the lower that is, the more fuel efficient the engine will be. And we can also use that to do a lot of interesting calculations. And then we go back to the spreadsheet here, because now we got pretty much all we need to start making these calculations. I will go out here. I have many more informations in this spreadsheet if you just go out along this tangent here. What I have here is I have a chat prompt, and that chat prompt is this one. And that one I simply copy, and then I go into a chat engine here. I use ChatGPT because it's one of the most intelligent chat AI systems there are. You know, when I'm not an expert in a field, then you can always go to a chatbot now and actually become an expert in almost anything, because these chatbots are pretty smart. Not fully smart, but they can do surprisingly many things. So the prompt here I gave it is, what is the top speed in kilometers per hour of a cruise missile given the following conditions? 1. It has 404 kilo of thrust that we just saw from this engine. Its drag coefficient is 0.12. Now, I also prompted that, and it told me that normally the drag coefficient for cruise missiles is between 0.1 and 0.3. But this cruise missile here, we can see the shape of this cruise missile is extremely aerodynamic. It flies fast, so it also only has small wings. That means we are at the lower end of this scale. So that's why I put in 0.12. And also the air density at sea level, I plotted that in because that's also a factor. It's 1.225 kilo per cubic meter. And then the final piece of information it needs is a frontal area of the missile. And I have judged from this picture, you could see that it's about half a square meter. So that was all the parameters that this chatbot needs in order to do the calculation, and then it goes through the calculation, and the conclusion is that the top speed of this cruise missile will be 1182 kilometers per hour. Now, if you look carefully in the equations, it's really only the information that I gave it here was the only thing it needed to do that calculation. In my first video that I made, in the first part of this video, I also gave it the weight of the missile because I thought that surely had to be a factor in this calculation. But it turns out that weight doesn't enter these equations at all. It's not a factor. So how can that be? Because obviously we know that if you fill up a transport airplane with a lot of stuff, then it cannot fly as long as if there's no cargo with that airplane. But it turns out the weight works through these variables that we have already given here. You have the drag coefficient and the frontal area. And what happens if you have a cargo airplane that is empty? Then the wings can be more flat and the steering flaps can be more straight. And that means it has less air drag and also a less frontal area than if it's filled with cargo. Then they have to be more steep in order to create more uplift for the plane to stay afloat. But that also creates more frontal area and more drag. So that's how weight indirectly operates through these equations. I didn't know that, but I thought it was funny to figure it out. And I found out when I was changing the weight, but none of the other variables, and then it came out with the exact same result. So then I asked, is it true that weight has nothing to do with this equation and that it in fact operates through air drag and also frontal area? And then the chatbot said, yes, that's true because this and that I just explained here. Of course, if it was truly smart, this chatbot, it should have said, when I gave it the weight, it should have said, HM, you don't really need to use the weight because that doesn't enter the equation. It enters through the air drag and the frontal area. That would have been a really smart chatbot. And if we had asked a professor in aviation, that would be what he would have said or she would have said pretty much immediately if I had such a question. But they're not that smart yet. But next year they will be that smart, I'm sure of it. But let's move on. So now we are back to this table here, and we can see we plotted in the 1182 kilometers per hour for this missile. But how do we know that it also has a range of 500 kilometer and a warhead of about 300 kilo. That was twice as much as what Wikipedia page reported for this weapon. But I find it out this way. First, I go in and then I use the information I have about the jet engine that's used in this weapon to calculate how many kilos of fuel it uses per hour. And it's just this number here. It's a thrust-specific fuel consumption multiplied by the thrust. And here I have specified this in kilo in order to calculate that. So we know this missile will use 315 kilo per hour. Now, if I plot in just by chance putting in 500 kilometers, then we also know that it will then take 25 minutes for this missile to reach its target. Now, if we know it takes 25 minutes, then we can say, okay, well, we spent 315 kilo of fuel per hour, so we adjust that with the 25 minutes it actually has to fly, and then we can calculate we'll have 133 kilo of fuel in the fuel tank of this weapon. And then what I do to calculate the warhead is that I have this calculation here. I calculate the weight of the missile without fuel. That was the 133 kilo we just calculated. And then I also saw the weight of the engine on that Wikipedia page. It's 86 kilo. And then I simply gave it a weight of 300 kilo for the warhead. And because I know also what the missile weight, because that information was on the Wikipedia page, was 870 kilo, then I have this calculation here that the missile weight without its engine, without its fuel, and without that warhead would be 350 kilo. Now that's for structure of the missile and also for electronics and actuators and navigation system, except for fuel, engine and warhead. And that looks right. It's 351 kilo for all of that when the missile is 870 kilo. And that's why I know I have gotten the other thing about warhead weight and range right. Of course, I started out with some different measures. I plotted first in what I had from Wikipedia, but that gave me a weight that would be way too big for structure. So I knew I had to bump up the weight of the warhead and also the range in order to have more weight in warhead and fuel. And then I came down to this 350 kilo. That looks right. And then I know I have got it. And that's basically how I work. I can figure it out that way. Of course, I've also calculated this for the other weapons that I don't have the specifications for. We know that Ukraine has made a land-based missile, and I have made some adjustments. My video will simply be too long if I explain how these adjustments are made and how I justify them. But I put all these adjustments and the justification for it in my spreadsheet so you can see it if you want to. Here I calculated that this missile that Ukraine has developed to hit land target will have about 600 kilometers range. It will not fly as fast. It'll be more heavy. I estimate it will be 980 kilo, so about 110 kilo more heavy than the anti-ship missile that the Neptune missile is. That will give it more range, and also they have to lower the speed because the jet engine this one will use is the same as for this Neptune missile, so it has the same thrust, but now it's a more heavy missile. That means in order to create uplift for this land-based missile, you need to put some bigger wings on it. That will create more drag. It will also create a larger frontal area. That means the speed will go down, and we can just prompt ChatGPT to get the speed that will result from that. And then I go through the same thing about how would I calculate the weight of this missile. Well, now I have the same weight I'm calculating here. Here I say the missile without fuel, that would be 208 kilo, up from 133 kilo for the anti-ship missile. Jet engine is still the same, 86 kilo, because it's the same engine. And warhead is also still the same, 300 kilo. And then I get a structural weight of the remaining part of the missile that also look right, and that's how I get to it. But there's a thing that Ukraine can do, because the problem is that Ukraine is making all this stuff in Ukraine, in factories in Ukraine that Russia can target. And Russia is undoubtedly targeting these Ukrainian factories. So what can Ukraine do to have even more production with an even more powerful weapon, and that Russia will not have the same opportunity to target? Well, they could build this Ballistic, I have called it the biggest. That would be a cruise missile that is built basically by copying the JASSM's extended range up here that we know the United States have built. But what Ukraine should do is they should ask United States for permission to buy the jet engine of that JASSM's missile, because it's even more fuel efficient and it also has more thrust, which is needed to build a more powerful weapon with a bigger warhead. They should buy the jet engine. They should also buy the warhead from the United States, because really the warhead that the JASSM missile has, it's a bunker-busting warhead that is perfect for destroying bridges and transportation hubs that Ukraine needs to destroy in order to deprive Russia of transporting any heavy weapons into the combat zone or any fuel into the combat zone. Then they have to take out all the bridges within 200 kilometers from the Ukrainian border and into Russia. If they take down all these bridges, and they could do that with a bunker-busting warhead and with this missile, then Russia cannot have any heavy weapons. They can't use their tanks, they can't use their armored personnel carriers, because they can't get the fuel in. All these bridges will be gone. Then Ukraine will win the war. In order to save time and get that missile built and assembled as fast as possible in Ukraine, they should also ask for permission just to buy the navigation system, the targeting system, and the homing system also from United States. And we know the United States can build this missile for only $1 million a piece. So the components here are in mass production already in the United States, and they're really good, and Ukraine should be able to buy them for a good price. And then they simply only have to assemble this weapon. One thing I'm sure that United States will not give Ukraine is the stealth characteristics of this JASSM's missile, because United States will want to keep that for themselves. But that's okay. It will still be an enormously capable weapon if it has the same warhead and the same ability to navigate and also the same speed as this JASSM missile. So the point I'm trying to make here is that if Ukraine are importing the really hard parts to make from the United States, then Russia will not have any factories in Ukraine they can bombard, because Ukraine is just importing these components and they only do assembling. They could do assembling in a large basement of some factory building where Russia can't easily disrupt the production. Plus, this assembling could be done in several places. It's not that it's a massive factory where they produce these things by a lot. It's hand assembled, and there will be a workshop that basically do that, and they will probably have a production of like one per week in that workshop, and then they could have a couple of workshops around in the country so Russia can't know where they are, and they're also very small, so it doesn't matter if Russia actually figure out where one of them are and then take it out. That will make it far more resilient to Russian attacks, and Ukraine can get production up quickly. Possibly, I have a little statement here that they could probably get it up next year, springtime. If they do that, just import the difficult components and then only do the structure of this missile and then get it into the war and start using it and then get production up as fast as possible. That's what I would do. Now, I also wanted to say a little bit about this JASSM missile that the United States have said they would now supply to Ukraine. What do we know here? There's this news reporting here from Reuters. It's basically some journalists who have picked up the phone to some of their buddies in the Biden administration to get some more knowledge about this weapon, and then they talk anonymously about what they know. And they say that they are working on getting this missile to Ukraine, and they are working out the details. Of course, there are some technicalities of getting this cruise missile to Ukraine. How should Ukraine launch it? Well, they can use a transportation aircraft like this C-130 Hercules aircraft that I talked about in a previous video about this JASSM system. They could launch it from that one, and that would be the most effective way to launch a lot of them fast. But then there's down here, they had also asked another official here, and one of the US officials said that there were efforts to make the missile operable with non-Western fighter jets in Ukraine inventory. That's the worst thing they could do, because that will just take extra time. The F-16 fighter jet that Ukraine have, and they're getting more and more of them, can fire this missile, so just use that. And use the transportation aircraft like the C-130 to start spending time making mounts so that this missile can go on a MiG-29 and stuff. Forget about it. Ukraine is going to become a NATO member. They're going to use NATO equipment going forward. So all these Soviet-era weapons, they're going to be history. Forget about it. Don't spend time on it. Just get it to work with NATO weapons. That's what I would do. I strongly advise the Biden administration just to forget about that and go straight to it and get these weapons transferred as fast as possible. You could say, well, HM here, you have just told us that Ukraine could produce these missiles themselves. The problem is Ukraine cannot produce enough of them. They need at least 1,000 of these missiles per year. It would be even better if they had 2,000 they could fire at Russia per year. There's no way Ukraine can get to that production of their own missiles themselves. It might be a production of like 300 at the best. So Ukraine needs more missiles to destroy all the bridges in Russia within 200 kilometers from that border in order to win the war. And as you can see here, there is one version of these JASSMs. That's the shortest range version, the first one that US made. US have 7,500 of them. And now I have investigated that weapon a little more deeply, and I found out it has an absolutely horrible engine that's very fuel inefficient, and that's why the range is so bad. The next version here of JASSMs, it's much newer. It got a new jet engine that's far more fuel efficient, and then they actually extended the fuel tank a little bit, but they could fit it in the same body of this cruise missile in order to almost triple the range of this cruise missile. So this cruise missile here is no longer produced. I'm sure of it because it's obsolete in terms of the engine it uses. And they have 7,500 on stock of that cruise missile. Give a couple of thousand of those to Ukraine and this war will be over pretty soon because Russia will start losing not 1,000 men every day on the battlefield. They will lose 3,000 men every day, and it will be totally unsustainable to continue the war for Russia. They will lose the war, and Ukraine will get all of their country back and restore freedom and democracy for their people as they should, and as we should help them with. But okay, I think this video is long enough now. I hope you liked it, and if you really liked it, give a little donation using that button I explained about in the start of the video. Also, I think some of the next videos that are forthcoming will be more about these JASSM missiles, especially the naval version of it, and perhaps how that can be used in a conflict with Taiwan. I also discovered non-publicly available information about that mainstream media constantly report wrongly about the capabilities of that weapon. It's actually far more capable, I have found out. But I'll make a forthcoming video about that, and subscribe if you're interested in watching that. All I have to say is have a great life in freedom and democracy. Goodbye.